The dust kicked up around Beatrice Sullivan's boots as she stormed across the main street of Parowan, Utah, her father's ultimatum still ringing in her ears like a curse she could not shake. It was the spring of 1882, and the desert town sat nestled against the Red Rock Mountains, a place where men made the rules and women were expected to smile and obey. But Beatrice had never been good at either of those things. Her father, Samuel Sullivan, owned the largest cattle ranch in Iron County, and at 22 years old she had managed to avoid marriage longer than any other woman in town, but her luck had finally run out. 3 suitors had formally asked for her hand, and her father insisted she choose one by the end of the month, or he would choose for her. The 3 men could not have been more different. There was Gerald Morton, the banker's son, whose soft hands had never known a day of real work. There was Frank Wheeler, a ranch hand twice her age with tobacco-stained teeth and a reputation for cruelty toward animals. And then there was Marcus Stone, the quiet cowboy who had drifted into town 6 months ago and taken work at the neighboring ranch. Marcus was different from the others in ways Beatrice could not quite articulate. He never pushed himself forward, never bragged about his abilities, and never looked at her the way the other men did, like she was a prize horse they wanted to own. Instead, when their eyes met across the general store or at Sunday service, there was something else there, something that made her heart beat faster and her thoughts scatter like startled birds. But pride ran through Beatrice's veins as surely as blood, and she would not simply be handed over to any man, no matter how he made her feel. She had grown up on horseback, had learned to rope and ride before she could raid, and she was the finest rider in the county, though few men would admit it. If she had to marry, it would be on her terms, in her way, according to her rules. The idea came to her as she stood in her father's parlor that evening, watching the sun set beyond the western mountains, painting the sky in shades of crimson and gold. "A race," she announced, her voice cutting through the quiet conversation her father was having with his foreman. Samuel looked up from his whiskey, his weathered face creasing with confusion. "What are you talking about, girl?" "A race," Beatrice repeated, turning to face him with her chin raised. "If I must marry one of these men, then let them prove themselves worthy. Let each of them race me from here to Cedar Breaks and back. The first one to beat me wins my hand." Her father's face darkened. "That is foolishness, Beatrice. A woman does not challenge men to races for her own hand in marriage. It is unseemly." "Then I suppose I will remain unmarried," she said coolly, "because I will not go willingly to any man who cannot best me at the thing I do better than anything else." The standoff lasted 3 full days. Her father raged and threatened. He reminded her of her duty, of propriety, of everything a woman should be. But Beatrice had inherited his stubborn streak, that iron will that had built his ranch from nothing, and she would not bend. Finally, exhausted and perhaps secretly impressed despite himself, Samuel agreed. The race would take place in 1 week's time, and all 3 suitors would be informed of the terms. Gerald Morton laughed when he heard the conditions, a nervous, high-pitched sound that made Beatrice's skin crawl. "A race? Well, how difficult could it be? I have the finest horse money can buy." Frank Wheeler spat tobacco juice into the dirt and grinned with brown teeth. "Little Philly wants to play games before she gets broken in proper. I will enjoy teaching her a thing or two after I win." But Marcus Stone simply nodded when the terms were explained to him. He was standing in the corral of the neighboring ranch, running his hands along the leg of a chestnut mare, checking for heat or swelling. He was tall, with dark hair that curled at his collar and eyes the color of summer sky. His face was sun-bronzed and angular, with a straight nose that had been broken at least once and a mouth that seemed more accustomed to silence than speech. When the messenger finished speaking, Marcus looked up toward the Sullivan ranch, though he could not see it from where he stood. "She does not want to marry any of us," he said quietly. The messenger, a young ranch hand named Pete, shrugged. "Maybe not, but her daddy says she has to choose. You going to race or not?" Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his hand still resting on the mare's warm flank. "I will race," he said finally, "but not because I expect to win." That week passed slowly for Beatrice. She rode her horse, a magnificent gray stallion named Thunder, every day, pushing him along the route the race would take. 30 miles through rough country, up into the high desert where the red rocks gave way to pine forest, around the natural amphitheater of cedar breaks where the earth fell away in layers of orange and white stone, and then back down to Parowan. It was punishing terrain, hard on both horse and rider, and she knew every rock and turn of it. She saw Marcus once during that week, early one morning when the sun was just breaking over the eastern mountains. She had ridden out before dawn, wanting to feel Thunder's stride in the cool air, and she found Marcus sitting on a flat rock near the spring that marked the halfway point of the race route. His horse, a rangy buckskin gelding, was drinking from the spring, and Marcus himself was motionless, watching the sunrise paint the desert in gold and rose. Beatrice pulled Thunder to a stop, intending to turn and ride away before Marcus noticed her, but the stallion nickered softly, and Marcus turned his head. For a moment, they simply looked at each other across the distance of 20 yards. Then Marcus stood, removing his hat in a gesture that seemed old-fashioned and courtly. "Miss Sullivan," he said. His voice was low and rough, like stones tumbling in a creek. "Mr. Stone." She kept her tone neutral, though her heart was hammering against her ribs. "Your father's ranch is in the other direction," he observed, but there was no judgment in his words, only statement of fact. "I am aware of where my father's ranch is located." The words came out sharper than she intended, a defense against the vulnerability she felt. Marcus nodded slowly, turning his hat in his hands. "I expect you are. You know this country better than any of us, I would wager." He paused, seeming to consider his next words carefully. "It is a good route for a race, fair but not easy." "I did not design it to be easy," Beatrice said. "I designed it to eliminate men who have no business making claims they cannot back up." Something that might have been amusement flickered in Marcus's eyes. "That is honest, at least." "I am always honest, Mr. Stone. It is one of my many faults, or so I have been told." "I do not think honesty is a fault," Marcus said. He took a step closer, and his horse followed him, trained to stay near without being tied. "Though I suppose it depends on who is judging." Beatrice found herself studying him more closely than she had allowed herself to before. There was a quietness to him that she found unsettling, not because it was threatening, but because it was so unlike the other men she knew. He did not fill the silence with empty words. He did not posture or preen. He simply existed in the space he occupied, as natural and unforced as the sage brush and the stones. "Why did you agree to race?" she asked suddenly. "You have been in Parowan for only 6 months. You barely know me." Marcus met her eyes, and she saw something in his gaze that made her breath catch. "I know enough," he said simply. "I know you ride like the wind itself. I know you have a mind as sharp as any man's and a heart that has not been given freely because no one has proven worthy of it. I know you would rather die than be forced into something against your will." He paused. "And I know that any man who cannot see all of that is a fool who does not deserve you." The words hung in the air between them, honest and raw. Beatrice felt heat rise in her cheeks, and she looked away, focusing on the distant mountains rather than the intensity of his gaze. "Pretty words, Mr. Stone," she said, trying to regain her equilibrium. but words are cheap in my experience. Then judge me by my actions, Marcus said. He put his hat back on and moved to his horse, swinging into the saddle with easy grace. I will see you at the race, Miss Sullivan. He rode away before she could respond, heading back toward town along a different route than the one she had taken. Beatrice watched him go, her emotions a tangle she could not unravel. Part of her was angry at his presumption, at his ability to see through her defenses. But another part, a part she was not ready to acknowledge, was drawn to him in ways that frightened her. She had built walls around herself, had armored her heart against the expectations and demands of others. But Marcus Stone seemed to slip past those defenses without even trying. The day of the race dawned clear and hot, the kind of day where the sun beat down like a hammer and the very air seemed to shimmer with heat. Half the town turned out to watch, lining the main street where the race would begin and end. Beatrice arrived on Thunder, the gray stallion dancing with barely contained energy beneath her. She wore practical clothing, split riding skirts and a cotton shirt, with her dark blonde hair braided and pinned close to her head. She had not slept well the night before, her mind churning with thoughts of the race and what came after. Gerald Morton arrived on a beautiful black thoroughbred, a horse that looked like it had been bred for show rather than endurance. He sat stiffly in his saddle, his face already red with the heat. Frank Wheeler rode a mean-looking bay with white around its eyes, and he kept jerking at the reins in a way that made Beatrice's jaw tighten with anger. A horse was a partner, not a slave, and any man who did not understand that had no business on its back. Marcus was the last to arrive, and when Beatrice saw him, her heart did a strange flip in her chest. He sat his buckskin gelding like he had been born in the saddle, moving with the horse rather than against it. He wore simple work clothes, faded denim and a plain cotton shirt, with a worn leather vest and a hat that had seen better days. But there was something about the way he carried himself, a quiet confidence that needed no adornment, that made him more striking than either of the other men in their finery. Samuel Sullivan stood in the center of the street, his expression grim. He had not wanted this race, had argued against it until his voice was hoarse, but Beatrice had left him no choice. Now he looked at his daughter with a mixture of pride and frustration, two emotions that had defined their relationship since her mother had died 10 years ago. The rules are simple, he announced, his voice carrying across the gathered crowd. Ride to cedar breaks around the marker stone at the rim and back here. First one across this line wins. He drew a line in the dirt with his boot heel. Any man who harms his horse is disqualified. Any man who interferes with another rider is disqualified. He paused, looking directly at Beatrice. And my daughter has the same rules applied to her. Beatrice nodded, her hands steady on the reins. Thunder was ready. She could feel it in every taut muscle beneath her. This was what they had trained for, what she had been preparing for all week. She would show them all what she was capable of, and she would remain free, at least for a while longer. Riders ready, Samuel called out. The 4 of them lined up, horses stamping and snorting. Beatrice glanced to her left and saw Marcus watching her. He touched the brim of his hat in a small salute, and she gave him a curt nod in return. Go, Samuel shouted, and the world exploded into motion. Thunder leaped forward, his powerful hindquarters bunching and releasing. Beatrice leaned low over his neck, feeling the wind tear past her face as they shot down the street and out of town. The other 3 horses were close behind, but she did not look back. Her focus was on the trail ahead, on the miles of hard riding that would test every ounce of skill and endurance she possessed. The first few miles were fast, the ground relatively flat and easy. Gerald's thoroughbred pulled ahead briefly. its longer legs eating up the distance, but Beatrice knew it would not last. That horse was built for short bursts of speed, not for the sustained punishment of a 30-mile race through rough country. She kept Thunder at a steady gallop, not pushing him too hard, saving his strength for the harder terrain ahead. Frank Wheeler was riding aggressively, using his spurs too much and sawing at his horse's mouth. Beatrice felt anger flash through her every time she heard the animal grunt with pain, but she pushed the feeling aside. She could not afford to be distracted by his cruelty. Not now. Marcus rode to her right, slightly behind but keeping pace easily. His buckskin was sure-footed and steady, and Marcus himself seemed completely at ease, as though they were out for a leisurely ride rather than a race that would determine Beatrice's future. She found herself glancing at him more than she should, distracted by the easy grace of his riding, by the way he and his horse moved as one unit. The terrain began to rise as they left the valley floor and climbed into the foothills. The trail narrowed, winding between rocks and scrub brush. Gerald fell back, his thoroughbred laboring on the uneven ground, its delicate legs picking carefully over stones. Frank's bay stumbled once, nearly going down, and Frank cursed loudly, jerking the reins hard enough to make Beatrice wince. But Marcus and his buckskin moved up the trail like water flowing uphill, smooth and unhurried. Thunder was breathing harder now, but he was strong, his stride still even and powerful. Beatrice guided him around a sharp switchback, leaning into the turn, and when she glanced back, she saw that Marcus was the only one still close. Gerald had fallen far behind, and Frank was fighting with his horse, losing ground with every moment. The air grew cooler as they climbed higher, the pines closing in around the trail. Beatrice's arms were aching from holding Thunder steady, and sweat ran down her back despite the temperature drop. She could hear Marcus's horse behind her, the steady rhythm of hoofbeats that never seemed to falter. Why was he not trying to pass her? He had to know that she was setting a hard pace, that Thunder was strong but not invincible. This was his chance to take the lead while she was focused on the trail ahead. They broke out of the trees suddenly, and the world opened up before them. Cedar breaks spread out like a wound in the earth, layers upon layers of stone in every shade of red and orange and white, carved by wind and water into fantastic spires and amphitheaters. The rim trail was narrow and dangerous, running along the edge of the cliffs with nothing but air and a 1,000-foot drop on one side. Beatrice slowed Thunder to a canter, then to a trot as they approached the marker stone. This was no place for recklessness. One misstep here, and both horse and rider would plunge to their deaths. She guided Thunder carefully around the marker, a tall stone pillar that had stood on the rim for as long as anyone could remember, and then turned back the way they had come. Marcus reached the marker less than a minute behind her. She watched as he navigated the turn, his movements careful and controlled, his hand gentle on the reins. Their eyes met as he completed the turn, and again she saw that strange expression in his face, something she could not quite name. The ride back down was faster, gravity working with them now instead of against them. Thunder seemed to sense they were heading home, and his pace quickened. Beatrice let him have his head a bit more, trusting his sure-footedness on the downhill trail. Behind her, she could hear Marcus keeping pace, never quite catching up but never falling behind either. They flew through the pine forest, dodging low branches and jumping over fallen logs. Beatrice felt alive in a way she rarely did, the fear and exhilaration mixing in her veins like wine. This was freedom. This was what she had been fighting for. The wind in her face, the powerful animal beneath her, the vast open country spreading out in all directions. No walls, no rules, No expectations except those she set for herself. But even as she thought it, she was aware of Marcus behind her, his presence somehow both comforting and unsettling. What did it mean that he had not tried to pass her? Was he simply biding his time, waiting for her to make a mistake? Or was there something else at play, some strategy she had not anticipated? They reached the foothills and the terrain flattened out. This was it, the final stretch where Thunder's speed would make the difference. Beatrice leaned forward, urging the stallion faster, and Thunder responded with a burst of speed that took her breath away. The ground blurred beneath them, the sagebrush a green-gray streak on either side. She could see Parowan in the distance now, the scattered buildings wavering in the heat shimmer. So close. Victory was so close she could taste it. Thunder was tiring, she could feel it in the subtle changes in his gait, but he had enough left to get them home. They were going to win. She was going to remain free, and then she felt it, the slight hitch in Thunder's stride, the momentary break in his rhythm. Her heart lurched with fear, and she immediately began to slow him, pulling back on the reins. Thunder fought her for a moment, wanting to keep running, but she insisted, bringing him down from a gallop to a canter to a trot. She slid from the saddle before he had fully stopped, her hands running over his legs, checking for injury. There, in his right foreleg, she could feel heat and slight swelling just above the fetlock. Not serious, probably just a strain from a bad step, but enough that continuing to run him hard could turn a minor injury into a catastrophic one. Beatrice felt tears of frustration burn in her eyes, but she blinked them back angrily. She would not cry, she would not show weakness. Marcus rode up beside her and dismounted in one smooth motion. "What is wrong?" he asked, his voice urgent with concern. "His leg," Beatrice said shortly. "He strained something. I cannot push him any further." Marcus knelt beside her, his hands joining hers in examining Thunder's leg. His touch was gentle and knowing, the hands of someone who understood horses. "It is not bad," he said after a moment. "But you are right, running him hard could make it worse." Beatrice stood, pressing her palm against her forehead. The town was only 2 miles away. 2 miles that might as well have been 200. Frank Wheeler thundered past them, his bay horse lathered with sweat and foam, its eyes rolling. He did not even look at them, focused only on reaching the finish line. "You should go," Beatrice said to Marcus, her voice flat. "You can still win." Marcus stood as well, looking at her rather than at the retreating figure of Frank. "Is that what you want?" he asked quietly. "For me to win?" "It does not matter what I want," Beatrice said bitterly. "My father will choose for me now since none of you beat me, and he will choose Frank because Frank's family owns land that borders ours, and it will be a good business arrangement." She could not keep the despair out of her voice. "I should have known better than to think I could control my own fate." Marcus was quiet for a long moment, his blue eyes searching her face. Then he said something that shocked her to her core. "I could beat you," she stared at him. "What?" "I could beat you to town," Marcus repeated. "My horse is fresh enough and you would have to walk Thunder to spare his leg. I could win the race." "Then why are you standing here?" Beatrice demanded, confusion and frustration making her sharp. Marcus stepped closer to her, close enough that she could see the flecks of darker blue in his eyes, close enough that she could smell the leather and sage scent of him. "Because I do not want to win that way," he said. "I do not want you to come to me because you lost a race or because your father forced you. I want you to choose me, Beatrice. I want you to choose me because you want to, not because you have no other option." Her name on his lips did something strange to her insides. No one called her Beatrice except her father when he was angry. Everyone else called her Miss Sullivan, keeping that formal distance. But Marcus said her name like it meant something, like it was precious. "You do not even know me," she whispered. I know enough, Marcus said again, echoing his words from their meeting at the spring. I know I have been watching you since I came to Parowan. I know I think about you every morning when I wake up and every night before I sleep. I know that when you laugh, which is not often enough, it is the finest sound I have ever heard. I know that you deserve a man who will see you as an equal, who will celebrate your strength instead of trying to break it. He paused. And I know that I am probably a fool for what I am about to do. Before she could ask what he meant, Marcus turned to his buckskin and began to unbuckle the girth, loosening the saddle. Beatrice watched in stunned silence as he removed his saddle entirely and set it on the ground. "What are you doing?" she asked. "Making it fair," Marcus said simply. He led his horse in a circle, letting it cool down from the hard ride. "We will both walk our horses into town. That way neither of us wins the race." "But Frank already passed us," Beatrice pointed out. "He will win." "Frank's horse is half dead," Marcus said grimly. "If he has any decency at all, he will have to stop before he reaches town. And even if he does not, even if he wins, your father said you have to choose from the three of us. He cannot force you to pick Frank." "He can refuse the other two," Beatrice said. "He can say that since neither you nor Gerald beat me, you are both eliminated." Marcus met her eyes steadily. "Then you will have to convince him otherwise." They walked side by side toward Parowan, leading their horses. Thunder's limp grew less pronounced as he cooled down, confirming Beatrice's assessment that the strain was minor. The sun beat down on them, and the silence stretched between them, but it was not uncomfortable. Beatrice found herself stealing glances at Marcus, trying to understand this man who had just sacrificed his chance at her hand in marriage for some abstract principle of fairness. "Why did you come to Parowan?" she asked after a while. Marcus was quiet for several steps before answering. "I was looking for a place to settle," he said. "I have been drifting for a long time since I was 18. My parents died of fever when I was 16, and my older brother inherited the family farm back in Missouri. He had a wife and children, and there was no real place for me there anymore. So I headed west, worked ranches from Kansas to California, never staying anywhere very long." "What changed?" Beatrice asked. Marcus glanced at her, and there was something vulnerable in his expression. "I got tired," he said honestly. "Tired of moving, tired of having no place to call home, tired of watching other men build lives while I just drifted past. When I came to Parowan, I felt something different. This valley, these mountains, the way the light hits the red rocks at sunset." He paused. "And then I saw you riding Thunder across the range eland, moving like you were part of the horse and part of the wind, and I thought maybe there was a reason I had ended up here." Beatrice's heart was beating too fast. "That is a lot to put on a person you have never even spoken to," she said, but her voice was soft, not defensive. "I know," Marcus admitted. "And I am not saying I fell in love with you in that moment, though I think maybe I started to. I am saying I saw something that made me want to stay, want to try to build something real instead of just drifting." "And what if I had chosen Gerald?" Beatrice asked. "Or what if my father chooses Frank for me? Then I would stay anyway," Marcus said. "I would work my ranch job and save my money and buy my own land someday. And I would watch you from a distance and wonder what might have been if I had been brave enough to tell you how I felt before a race decided everything." He looked at her directly. "But I am telling you now, Beatrice. I am telling you that I think you are the most remarkable woman I have ever met. I am telling you that I would count it the greatest honor of my life if you would consider choosing me, not because you have to, but because you want to." Beatrice felt tears threatening again, but this time they were not tears of frustration. "You let me win," she said suddenly, understanding flooding through her. "Back there when we were riding, You could have passed me a dozen times, but you stayed behind me. You let me win." Marcus did not deny it. "I did not want to take that from you," he said. "Your victory, your moment of proving everyone wrong, it mattered to you, so it mattered to me." "But you sacrificed your own chance," Beatrice said. "Winning a race is not the same as winning a heart," Marcus said quietly. "I think I knew that if I beat you, even fairly, you would always resent me for it a little. You would always wonder if you could have won if things had been different. I did not want that between us." They walked in silence for a while longer, processing everything that had been said. Beatrice felt like her world had tilted on its axis. She had spent so much energy fighting against being forced into marriage, building walls to protect herself, that she had not considered what it might be like to find someone who wanted to stand beside her rather than in front of her, someone who saw her strength as a gift rather than a threat. As they crested the last hill before town, they saw a commotion in the street. Frank Wheeler was there, on foot, his bay horse standing with its head hanging low, trembling with exhaustion. Her father was there too, and he looked furious. Even from a distance, Beatrice could hear the shouting. They hurried their pace, and as they got closer, the situation became clear. Frank had ridden his horse to the point of collapse, and now the animal could barely stand. Samuel Sullivan, whatever his flaws, was a horseman through and through, and he was tearing into Frank with a ferocity that made several bystanders step back. "You damned fool," Samuel was roaring. "You could have killed this animal. What kind of man runs a horse into the ground like this?" "I won the race," Frank protested, his face flushed. "That means I get your daughter. You do not get anything except a boot out of my town," Samuel snarled. "I said any man who harmed his horse was disqualified, and you near about killed yours. Get out of my sight before I have you thrown in jail for animal cruelty." Frank looked around wildly, seeing his victory slipping away. "You cannot do that. The rules were to win the race, and I made the rules," Samuel said with cold finality. "And I say you are disqualified. Now get out of here." Frank's face contorted with rage, but he was smart enough to know when he was beaten. He grabbed his horse's reins, jerking them hard enough to make the exhausted animal stumble, and stalked off toward the livery. Several men followed him, making sure he actually left town. Samuel turned and saw Beatrice and Marcus approaching on foot, leading their horses. His expression shifted from anger to confusion. "What happened?" he demanded. "Thunder strained his leg," Beatrice said, her voice steady despite the turmoil of her emotions. "It is not serious, but I could not run him any further without risking real injury." Her father's face softened slightly as he examined Thunder's leg himself. "You did right," he said gruffly. "A horse is worth more than a race." He looked at Marcus. "And you, why did you not continue?" Marcus met the older man's eyes without flinching. "It did not seem fair to win because Miss Sullivan had to protect her horse from injury, so I chose not to continue either." Samuel stared at him for a long moment, and Beatrice could not read her father's expression. Finally, he said, "That might be the most foolish thing I have ever heard, or the most honorable. I have not decided which yet." Gerald Morton had apparently never even completed the race. His thoroughbred had gone lame 5 miles out, and he had walked it back to town from the other direction, arriving just after Frank. He took one look at the situation, and with impressive cowardice, declared that he was withdrawing his suit entirely. "Clearly Miss Sullivan is too wild for civilized marriage," he announced pompously. "I wish you luck finding a husband who can handle her." Beatrice felt her temper flare, but before she could say anything cutting in response, Marcus stepped forward. His voice was quiet but carried to every person watching. "Beatrice does not need to be handled. She needs to be respected, appreciated, and loved for exactly who she is. Any man who does not understand that is not worthy of her. A murmur ran through the crowd. It was unseemly for a ranch hand to speak so boldly, to use a woman's given name in public, to make such declarations. But there was something in Marcus's tone, in the way he stood his ground, that commanded respect rather than mockery. Samuel looked between his daughter and the cowboy, and Beatrice saw understanding dawn in his eyes. "It seems to me," he said slowly, "that the terms of the race have not been met. No one beat Beatrice, which means the original agreement stands. She has to choose from the 3 suitors." He paused. "Though with Frank disqualified and Gerald withdrawn, that leaves only one option." "That is not fair," Beatrice said quickly. "Marcus should not win by default just because the other 2 were fools." Marcus looked at her, and she saw a flicker of hurt in his eyes before he masked it. "She is right," he said. "If Beatrice does not want to marry me, then the whole race was pointless. She should not be forced to accept me just because I am the only one left." Samuel rubbed his weathered face with one hand, looking suddenly tired. "Beatrice," he said, his voice gruff but not unkind, "I am a stubborn old man, and I have been trying to control you the way I would control a spooked horse, with force and authority. But your mother, God rest her soul, would be ashamed of me for it. She always said you were special, that you needed room to run free." He paused, his eyes suspiciously bright. "So here is my final word on the matter. You do not have to marry anyone. Not now, not ever, if that is your choice. I will not force you." Beatrice felt her throat tighten with emotion. It was the closest her father had come to an apology in years, and she knew how much it cost him to admit he had been wrong. "Thank you," she whispered. Samuel nodded once, then turned to address the crowd. "Show is over, folks. Everyone back to your business." He paused, looking at Marcus. "Stone, take your horse to the livery and see that he is properly cooled down and fed. You have acted with honor today, and I respect that, even if I think you are a fool for throwing away your chance." As the crowd dispersed, Beatrice found herself standing alone with Marcus in the middle of the street. Thunder nudged her shoulder gently, and she reached up to stroke his face, grateful for his steady presence. "I am sorry," Marcus said quietly. "I did not mean to make things more complicated for you." "You did not," Beatrice said. "You made them simpler, actually." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Marcus, do you mean what you said about wanting me to choose you?" His blue eyes met hers, intense and honest. "Every word." "Even though I am stubborn and proud and too wild for civilized marriage." She quoted Gerald's words with a bitter twist to her mouth. "Especially because of those things," Marcus said. He took a step closer. "Beatrice, I do not want to tame you or change you. I want to stand beside you and watch you be everything you were meant to be. I want to race horses with you and argue with you and laugh with you. I want to build a life where we are partners, true partners, not owner and property." Beatrice felt something break open in her chest, a wall she had built so carefully crumbling under the weight of his words. "I do not know how to do this," she admitted. "I have spent so long fighting against marriage that I do not know how to fight for it." "Then do not fight," Marcus said gently. "Just choose. Choose what you want, not what you think you should want or what someone else expects. Just choose." She looked at him, really looked at him, and saw a future she had not allowed herself to imagine. She saw mornings riding out to check the herd together, evenings sitting on a porch watching the sunset, nights wrapped in each other's arms. She saw laughter and arguments and making up afterwards. She saw children, maybe, someday, running wild across the rangeland the way she once had. She saw a partnership built on respect and equality and love. "I choose you," she said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff and finding that she could fly. "I choose you, Marcus Stone." The smile that spread across his face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains, transforming his serious features into something joyful and young. He closed the distance between them in 2 strides and took her hands in his. "Are you certain?" he asked. "Beatrice, I need you to be certain. I am not a rich man. I do not have land or a fancy house. All I have is a decent horse, some savings, and a willingness to work hard to build a life for us." "I have never been more certain of anything," Beatrice said, and she meant it. Something had shifted in her during that long walk back to town, during their conversation and his confession. She had spent so long defining herself by what she would not accept that she had forgotten to consider what she actually wanted. And what she wanted, she realized with crystal clarity, was this man who saw her as an equal, who respected her strength, who was willing to sacrifice his own victory to preserve her agency. Marcus lifted her hands to his lips and kissed her knuckles gently. "Then I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this choice," he promised. From the porch of the Sullivan ranch house, Samuel watched his daughter and the cowboy, their heads bent together in conversation, and he felt his wife's presence beside him as surely as if she still lived. Mary would have liked this young man, he thought. She would have seen what he saw now, the way Marcus looked at Beatrice like she hung the moon and stars, the way Beatrice's face softened when she looked back at him. Maybe he had been wrong about a lot of things. Maybe strength was not about control and force. Maybe sometimes the strongest thing you could do was let go and trust that the people you loved would make the right choices for themselves. Over the next few weeks, Marcus courted Beatrice properly, though it looked different from any courtship Parowan had ever seen. Instead of formal calls and parlor visits, they spent their time riding together across the range, working side by side to repair fences and move cattle. They talked for hours, sharing their histories and dreams and fears, building a foundation of friendship beneath the attraction that sparked between them. Marcus told her about growing up in Missouri, about the feeling of being adrift after his parents died, about the loneliness of always being on the move. Beatrice told him about her mother's death, about the way her father had closed himself off afterward, about her fear of losing herself in marriage the way she had seen other women lose themselves. "My mother was strong before she married," Beatrice said one evening as they sat by the creek that ran through the Sullivan ranch. "She was educated and independent and full of dreams, but little by little, she gave all of that up to be my father's wife. She was happy, I think, but I always wondered what she might have been if she had not had to make that choice." Marcus was quiet for a moment, turning a smooth stone over in his hands. "My mother never gave up who she was," he said finally. "She and my father worked the farm together, truly together. He would ask her opinion on when to plant and what to buy, and she taught both me and my brother to read and write. When she died, my father only lasted 6 months before the fever took him too. I think he could not imagine a life without her in it." He looked at Beatrice. "That is what I want, not ownership but partnership so deep that we cannot imagine existing without each other." "That is terrifying," Beatrice admitted. "Yes," Marcus agreed, "but also beautiful." They were married on a warm day in early June, just as the desert flowers were blooming in carpets of yellow and orange across the foothills. It was a small ceremony, just family and close friends, held outside beneath a bower of pine branches. Beatrice wore a simple dress of cream-colored cotton, with her hair loose around her shoulders the way Marcus loved it. Marcus wore his best shirt and pants, with a new vest that Samuel had quietly bought for him as a wedding gift. The minister kept the ceremony short, understanding that neither bride nor groom had much patience for lengthy speeches. When it came time for the vows, Marcus took Beatrice's hands and spoke words he had written himself. Beatrice, I promise to stand beside you, not in front of you or behind you, but right beside you as we face whatever comes. I promise to celebrate your victories and support you through your failures. I promise to listen when you need to be heard and to be silent when you need space. I promise to love you not in spite of your wild spirit, but because of it. His voice was steady, but his eyes were bright with emotion. I promise to be your partner in all things, today and every day for the rest of our lives. Beatrice felt tears slip down her cheeks, and she did not bother to wipe them away. Marcus, I promise to choose you every day the way I chose you that day in the street. I promise to trust you with my heart, even though that scares me. I promise to work beside you and dream with you and build a life that belongs to both of us. She squeezed his hands. I promise to love you with all my stubborn, proud, wild heart, and to let you love me in return. When they kissed, sealing their promises, the small gathering erupted in applause and cheers. Samuel Sullivan stood with tears running unashamedly down his weathered face, mourning the wife he had lost and celebrating the daughter he had almost lost, but had somehow found again. Marcus had saved every penny he earned working at the neighboring ranch, and combined with a wedding gift of money from Samuel, they had enough to buy a small parcel of land adjoining the Sullivan Ranch. It was rough country, 40 acres of rangeland with a creek running through it and a stand of cottonwood trees that provided shade in the brutal summer heat. There was no house, only a one-room cabin that was barely more than a shed, but they did not care. They spent their first months of marriage living in that tiny cabin and working from dawn until dusk to improve their land. Marcus built a barn and a corral while Beatrice planted a vegetable garden and repaired the cabin's roof. They worked together to clear rocks from the best grazing land and to dig irrigation channels from the creek. It was hard work, the kind that left them both exhausted and sore at the end of each day, but it was their work, their land, their dream taking shape. Samuel helped when he could, lending equipment and advice, though he was careful not to overstep. He had learned his lesson about trying to control Beatrice's life, and he respected the independence she and Marcus were building. But he was pleased to see his daughter happy in a way she had never been before, pleased to see her bloom under the love and respect Marcus showed her. Their first anniversary found them standing in front of a proper house, small but well built, with 2 bedrooms and a real kitchen and windows that let in the morning light. Marcus had built it with his own hands, working through the winter months, and Beatrice had sewn curtains and made furniture from wood she had chosen herself. It was theirs, every nail and board, and they were proud of it in a way that went beyond simple ownership. "You have any regrets?" Marcus asked as they stood on their new porch watching the sun set over the red rock mountains. Beatrice leaned against him, his arm comfortable around her waist. "None," she said honestly. "Do you?" "Only that I did not have the courage to talk to you sooner," Marcus said, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I wasted 6 months watching you from a distance when I could have been getting to know you. Maybe it needed to happen the way it did," Beatrice mused. "Maybe I needed to be pushed to the point where I had to fight for my freedom before I could understand that choosing love was not the same as giving up that freedom." "Wise words, Mrs. Stone," Marcus said with a smile. "I learned them from a very smart cowboy," Beatrice replied, turning in his arms to kiss him properly. 2 years into their marriage, Beatrice realized she was pregnant. The news filled her with a complex mixture of emotions. She was excited, certainly, and so was Marcus when she told him. But she was also afraid. Afraid of losing herself the way she had always feared, afraid of becoming only a mother and not still herself, afraid of the risks that came with childbirth in a place far from proper medical care. Marcus sensed her fear without her having to speak it. "You are not your mother," he said gently one night as they lay in bed, his hand resting on her still flat stomach. "You are not giving anything up by having a child. You are adding to yourself, not subtracting." "How can you be sure?" Beatrice asked. "Because I will not let you disappear," Marcus promised. "After the baby comes, I will mind him or her while you ride thunder. I will cook dinner while you work with the horses. I will change diapers and rock cradles and do whatever it takes to make sure you still have room to be Beatrice, not just mother." "Him or her," Beatrice repeated with a small smile. "You have given this some thought." "I think about it all the time," Marcus admitted. "About whether we will have a son with your determination or a daughter with your spirit. About teaching them to ride and to work and to see the beauty in this harsh country. About the family we are building together." Their son was born in the spring, a squalling red-faced creature that Marcus declared was the most beautiful thing he had ever seen aside from his wife. They named him Thomas, after Marcus's father, and from the moment he drew breath, he owned their hearts completely. True to his word, Marcus was a devoted father who insisted on doing his full share of the work. He learned to change diapers and warm milk and soothe a crying baby at 3 in the morning. He wore Thomas in a sling against his chest while he worked, narrating everything he did in a running commentary that made Beatrice laugh. And he made sure that Beatrice had time each day to be herself, to ride out on thunder or work with their growing herd of horses, or simply sit in the quiet and remember who she was beyond motherhood. It was not always easy. There were nights when they were both so exhausted they could barely speak, days when the baby cried endlessly, and they had no idea what was wrong, moments when Beatrice felt swallowed by the demands of caring for an infant. But they navigated it together, splitting the burden equally, supporting each other through the hardest parts. Samuel proved to be a doting grandfather, though he tried to maintain his gruff exterior. He carved toys for Thomas and showed up with gifts he claimed he had just happened to find. When Beatrice teasingly pointed out that he had never been this soft when she was a child, he grumbled that he had been a fool then and was trying to do better now. She hugged him hard, and he held her for a long moment, both of them thinking of Mary and wishing she could see the family her daughter had built. As Thomas grew from infant to toddler, he showed every sign of inheriting both his mother's fearlessness and his father's steady temperament. By the time he was 2, he was already demanding to be put on a horse, and Beatrice started teaching him to ride on a gentle old mare they had bought specifically for that purpose. Marcus watched them circle the corral, his son's laughter ringing out clear and bright, and felt a contentment deeper than anything he had imagined possible. The stone ranch grew slowly but steadily. They bought more land when they could afford it, increasing their acreage to over 100 acres of good rangeland. They built a larger barn and expanded their herd of horses, gaining a reputation for selling animals that were well-trained and gentle-natured. Beatrice handled most of the horse training while Marcus managed the cattle and maintenance, but they made every major decision together, sitting at their kitchen table and talking through the options until they reached agreement. When Thomas was 4, Beatrice became pregnant again. This time there was less fear and more simple happiness. She knew what to expect now, knew that she could be both mother and herself, knew that Marcus would be beside her every step of the way. Their daughter was born in the late fall, tiny and perfect, with Marcus's blue eyes and Beatrice's determined chin. They named her Mary, after Beatrice's mother, and Samuel cried when they told him. Life fell into a rhythm that felt right. The days were full of work and purpose, the evenings full of family. Thomas and Mary grew up wild and free the way Beatrice had, learning to ride almost before they could walk, learning the land and the animals and the 100 small skills it took to survive and thrive in the desert country. But they also learned to read and write, with Beatrice teaching them every evening after supper, determined that they would have the education she had fought so hard to give herself. When Thomas was 10 and Mary was 6, a newcomer rode into the valley looking for work. He was young, probably 19 or 20, and he had that same drifting quality that Marcus had once had. Marcus hired him to help with the spring roundup, and over dinner that night, the young man told his story. He had left home after his parents died, had been moving from ranch to ranch looking for something he could not quite name. After he had gone to the bunkhouse, Beatrice looked at Marcus across the table. "That was you once," she said softly. Marcus nodded. "It was. I see myself in him, that restlessness, that feeling of not quite belonging anywhere." "What changed for you?" Beatrice asked, though she knew the answer. "You," Marcus said simply. "This place, this life, this family, finding something worth staying for." Later that night, after the children were asleep, they sat on their porch watching the stars wheel overhead. Marcus's arm was around Beatrice's shoulders, her head resting against his chest, and they were quiet for a long time, comfortable in the silence that came from years of knowing each other. "Do you ever think about that race?" Beatrice asked eventually. "About what would have happened if things had gone differently?" "Sometimes," Marcus admitted. "I think about what would have happened if Thunder had not strained his leg. If you had won outright, would you still have chosen me? Or would you have seen it as validation that you did not need anyone?" "I would have chosen you," Beatrice said with certainty. "Maybe not right away, maybe not that day, but eventually I would have come to you, because what you gave me was not victory or defeat, but choice. And that mattered more than any race ever could." "I am glad I let you win," Marcus said quietly. Beatrice pulled back to look at him, her eyes searching his face in the starlight. "You know the truth, do not you? You did not let me win. You could have beaten me, but it would have been close. Thunder is fast, and I know that route better than anyone. You might have won, or I might have. We will never know for certain." Marcus smiled, that rare, full smile that transformed his face. "Does it matter?" "No," Beatrice said, settling back against him. "It does not matter at all. Because we both won in the end. We both got exactly what we needed." The years continued to pass, marked by the rhythms of ranch life and family. Thomas grew tall and serious, inheriting his father's quiet strength and his mother's skill with horses. He took over more and more of the ranch work, learning everything Marcus could teach him about managing land and livestock. Mary was wilder, more impulsive, with a spirit that reminded Samuel so strongly of his daughter at that age that it made his heart ache. She could outride most grown men by the time she was 13, and she had no interest in the domestic arts that other girls her age were learning. "She is just like you were," Samuel told Beatrice one day, watching Mary race across the rangeland on her favorite horse. "I know," Beatrice said. "And I will not make the same mistakes you did. I will not try to force her into a mold she does not fit." "I hope she finds someone like Marcus," Samuel said softly. He was in his 70s now, his hair white and his movements slowed by age, but his mind was still sharp. "Someone who sees her strength as a gift." "She will," Beatrice said confidently. "And if she does not want to marry at all, that will be fine too. She will make her own choices, whatever they are." Samuel nodded, satisfied. He had learned that lesson well, learned it in time to be a better grandfather than he had been a father. It was a gift he treasured, this second chance to get it right. When Marcus was 45 and Beatrice was 43, Samuel died peacefully in his sleep. They buried him on the Sullivan Ranch next to Mary, and the entire county turned out for the funeral. Samuel had been a hard man, but a respected one, and his passing marked the end of an era in the valley. In his will, Samuel left the Sullivan Ranch to Beatrice, though by that point, Thomas was running it day to day. The young man had merged it with the Stone Ranch, creating a single operation that was one of the largest and most successful in the region. He had his grandfather's head for business and his parents' integrity, and he treated the land and animals with respect. Mary, meanwhile, had shocked everyone by deciding to become a teacher. She had always loved learning, and she wanted to pass that love on to other children, especially girls who might not otherwise have access to education. She opened a small school on the ranch, teaching reading and writing and arithmetic to children from all over the valley. She never married, though she had plenty of suitors, claiming she was too busy living her life to be tied down. Beatrice and Marcus supported her completely, proud of the independent woman she had become. As they moved into their 50s and then their 60s, Marcus and Beatrice found themselves with time for each other that they had not had since the early years of their marriage. The ranch ran itself with Thomas at the helm, and they were free to do the things they loved. They rode out together almost every day, exploring the country they had spent their lives working, finding new beauty in familiar landscapes. Thunder had died years ago, at the grand old age of 28, and Beatrice had mourned him like she would mourn a friend. But she had other horses now, Thunder's descendants, and she took the same joy in riding them that she always had. Marcus's buckskin had been gone even longer, but he too had been replaced by younger horses, each one trained with care and patience. "You remember the day we met?" Beatrice asked one afternoon as they sat by the creek, their boots off and their feet in the cool water. "The day at the spring," Marcus said, "or the day of the race?" "Either. Both." Beatrice leaned back on her hands, her face turned up to the sun. "I was so angry that day, so determined not to be forced into something I did not want. I could not see past my own fear and pride." "You were magnificent," Marcus said. "Fierce and beautiful and so alive. I fell a little bit more in love with you every time I saw you." "Even when I was being stubborn and difficult?" Beatrice asked with a smile. "Especially then," Marcus said. "Anyone can love someone who is easy. It takes something special to love someone with sharp edges and a will of iron." He reached over and took her hand. "I am grateful every day that you chose me, Beatrice. Every single day." "I am grateful you gave me the chance to choose," Beatrice replied. "You could have won that race, could have claimed me as your prize, but you gave me my agency instead, and that made all the difference." They sat in comfortable silence, hands linked, watching the water flow past. They were older now, with silver in their hair and lines on their faces, but the love between them had only deepened with time. It was a love built on respect and partnership, on shared work and shared dreams, on thousands of small kindnesses and compromises. When Marcus was 70 and Beatrice was 68, they celebrated their 40th wedding anniversary. Thomas and his wife hosted a party at the big ranch house, and it seemed like half the county came to celebrate with them. There were grandchildren everywhere. Thomas's 4 and Mary's adopted children from her school, running and playing and filling the house with noise and laughter. At one point in the evening, someone called for a toast, and Thomas stood up with a glass raised. "To my parents," he said, his voice carrying across the crowded room, "who taught me that marriage is not about one person leading and the other following, but about two people walking side by side through life. Who showed me that real love is not about possession or control, but about respect and partnership." He paused, his eyes bright. "You built something rare and beautiful, and you gave me and Mary a foundation we could build our own lives on. We love you both more than words can say." The toast was met with applause and cheers, and Beatrice found herself crying, something she rarely did. Marcus put his arm around her and kissed her temple, the same gesture he had made 10,000 times over the years, as familiar as breathing. "No regrets," he murmured in her ear. "Not a single one," Beatrice whispered back. "You—" "Only that we did not have more time," Marcus said. "Whatever years we get will never be enough." As it turned out, they had another decade together, 10 more years of riding and working and simply being together. They slowed down as age caught up with them, but they never stopped completely. They were still riding out to check fences when Marcus was 79, and Beatrice was 77, still making decisions about the ranch together, still partners in every way that mattered. Marcus died first peacefully, on a warm summer evening with Beatrice holding his hand. He had been declining for several months, his heart giving out slowly, and they both knew the end was coming. But he held on long enough to see one more sunset from their porch, long enough to tell Beatrice one more time that choosing her had been the best decision of his life, long enough to close his eyes surrounded by everyone he loved. Beatrice lived for 3 more years after Marcus died, but they were shadow years. Her light dimmed without him. She still rode, still worked with the horses, still spent time with her children and grandchildren. But everyone could see that part of her had gone with Marcus, that she was just waiting for her time to follow him. She died on a spring morning in her sleep with no pain or struggle. Thomas found her in her bed, her face peaceful, her hands folded over her chest. On her bedside table was a photograph taken on their 40th anniversary, Marcus and Beatrice standing together on their porch, his arm around her waist, both of them smiling at the camera. Beneath it was a letter she had written to her children, to be read after she was gone. Thomas opened it with trembling hands, Mary standing beside him, and they read their mother's final words together. "My dear children," the letter began in Beatrice's careful handwriting. "If you are reading this, then I have gone to join your father and I am grateful for it. These last years without him have been hard in ways I cannot fully express. He was my partner, my love, my best friend, and my whole self for more than 40 years, and living without him was like living with half a heart. I want you to know that I have no regrets about the life I lived. I fought hard for my freedom, for my right to make my own choices, and I never surrendered that. But I also learned that choosing love, choosing partnership, choosing to share your life with someone is not the same as giving up your freedom. With the right person, it is actually the opposite. Marcus made me more myself, not less. He gave me room to be everything I wanted to be while also giving me the gift of being part of something larger than myself. I hope you both have found that in your own lives, or will find it. True partnership, where you are equals, where you respect and celebrate each other's strengths, where you face life side by side instead of one leading and one following. That is the gift your father gave me, and it is the gift we tried to give you. Take care of the land we built together. Take care of each other. And remember that the bravest thing you can ever do is let yourself be loved, really loved, by someone who sees you as you truly are and thinks you are magnificent because of it, not in spite of it. All my love, always, Mother. They buried Beatrice next to Marcus on a hill overlooking their ranch, with a view of the Red Rock Mountains and the valley they had loved. The entire county came to pay their respects, multiple generations of people whose lives had been touched by the stones in one way or another. Thomas gave the eulogy, speaking of his parents' love story, of how it had started with a race and a choice, and had grown into something that inspired everyone who knew them. Years later, when Thomas was old himself and telling stories to his own grandchildren, he would talk about his parents with a reverence that never faded. He would tell them about the famous race, about how his father had let his mother win, and how his mother had chosen his father anyway. He would tell them about partnership and respect, and the courage it takes to really love someone. And he would tell them that his parents had been proof that true love, the kind that lasts a lifetime, was not about finding someone perfect, but about finding someone whose imperfections fit with yours, whose strengths complemented your weaknesses, whose presence made you want to be better while also accepting you exactly as you were. The Stone Ranch continued for generations, a legacy built on hard work and integrity and love. And though the people changed, though new generations took over the land and the animals, the story of Marcus and Beatrice remained, passed down from parent to child, a reminder of what love could be when two people chose each other freely and completely, and then chose each other again, every day, for the rest of their lives. The race had been the beginning, but it was only that. The real story was everything that came after, the decades of partnership and love, the family they built, the land they worked, the life they created together. It was a story without any single dramatic moment that defined it, but rather thousands of small moments, small choices, small kindnesses that added up to something extraordinary. And in the end, that was the truth that Thomas wanted his grandchildren to understand. Love was not about grand gestures or dramatic rescues. It was about showing up every day, about doing the work, about choosing your partner over and over again, even when it was hard, especially when it was hard. It was about respect and trust, and the willingness to be vulnerable with someone who had proven they would handle your heart with care. Marcus and Beatrice had understood that from the very beginning. From the moment, Marcus had chosen to let Beatrice win, to give her the victory and the choice. He had been showing her what their life together could be. And from the moment Beatrice had chosen him anyway, had seen past the results of the race to the quality of the man, she had been showing him that she understood, that she wanted what he was offering. Everything else, all the years that followed, had simply been them living out the promise of that first choice, proving every day that they had been right to choose each other, that their love was strong enough to weather any storm, that their partnership was built on bedrock that could not be shaken. And so the story ended where it began, with a choice freely made and a love freely given, and with two people who found in each other exactly what they needed to become everything they were meant to be. It was a simple story in many ways, but it was also profound, a reminder that the best love stories were not about people who completed each other, but about people who complemented each other, who made each other better while still remaining wholly themselves. That was the legacy Marcus and Beatrice Stone left behind. Not just the land and the ranch and the family, but the example of what love could be when it was done right, when it was built on mutual respect and shared dreams and the courage to be vulnerable with someone you trusted completely. It was a legacy that would endure long after their names were forgotten, carried forward in the choices their descendants made, in the way they loved their own partners, in the values they passed down to their own children. And somewhere, in whatever place existed beyond this life, Marcus and Beatrice were together again, riding side by side through endless country, partners for eternity, just as they had been partners in life. The race was long over, but the love it had sparked burned on, a bright flame that would never be extinguished, a testament to the power of choice and respect, and two hearts that had recognized each other across the distance, and decided together to build something beautiful,